Okay. Hi, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Michael Cantwell. I'm the president of this august club. We like to think of ourselves as the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, like the late lamented Paul Wellstone. I'm also the editor of the newsletter, which I hope you've all taken copies of and take extra copies. Shar, who's sitting right over there with the camera, has a delivery list of 123 people in our community, and she walks around door to door. So it's you know, one of the things we really need to do to win is get out information. There's a lot of disinformation out there. So I'm going to introduce two people before Dr. Mark Schneider, who's the president of the Palm Beach County chapter of the ACLU. Mark has spoken a couple of times to the club. The first time actually was, I think, the first meeting that we had with the reconstituted club, talking on Amendment 4, when Amendment 4 was, I think, not even at the drafting stage, or just at the drafting stage. And it was a great talk. He came back before the midterms and told us what the 13 or 14 amendments were all about. And tonight is going to be speaking on Amendment 4 again, but on the question of whether the United States is a democracy. I think that's the easier answer, or that's the question that's easier to answer than the second one, should it be. Michelle Damone is the campaign manager, I think, for Jim Bonfiglio, who I think everyone knows lost by 32 votes last time, which is just an outrage, and we've got to change that. And we've got someone coming to help us with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for this time. I appreciate it. My name is Michelle Damone, and I work for Jim Bonfiglio because I'm going to make sure he wins this time around in 2020. But I have some exciting news that Bob and I have worked on. Andrew Gillum in his PAC, Ford, Florida, have endorsed Jim Bonfiglio for District 89. And there is one of 6 seats that Andrew Gillum's PAC is going all out for in support. So they called me and they asked if I could pick a spot somewhere in District 89 to host a kickoff, a weekend of action. And I chose Pompey Park because of this group and this organization. Every time I come to visit you guys, I have never felt a facility that has more of a community feel than yours. I know it's 2 blocks outside of 89, but it still services District 89's area. Because when you go right over there, or a little further east, is District 89. And I'm sure there's plenty of you here that live in 89. So Bob and I are working on this together. Mike is aware too, but April 1st, yes, it's not April Fool's Day for Andrew Gillum, he will be here, but April 1st is the day. It'll be 7 p.m. in the gymnasium here. Uh-oh. And I have a loud enough voice. So anyways, I hope you all can attend because it's going to be a huge thing. We're going to have the press, There's going to be a lot of your local community leaders as well as countywide and statewide leaders. So I need all of you to come. I'm inviting you. It is Wednesday, April 1st at 7 p.m. in the gymnasium. Please come in advance. I asked the Delray Divas to participate, so it's going to be that old-fashioned community pep rally, all to get Jim Bonfiglio elected and get us past those 32 votes. So, thank you. And I have postcard packets, because it is grassroots, if anybody wants one, they're here if they want to fill them out for Jim.
What is that again?
Postcard packets.
What kind of packet?
Postcard? Postcard. If anybody want to write postcards, instructions, stamps, pins, stickers, everything's inside this little kit. But anyways, Jim. Jim's the candidate, so.
Okay, now, did you want to say something? This is not working.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, take this. Yeah, no, not like Iowa. We wouldn't get Hillary's data to run our microphones.
That's right. Begins with T with a capital T and it's, no. Anyway, so much for Iowa. Hey guys, again, if you don't know, I'm Bob Avrek, Vice President of this August, I think Michael said, club. And also when I'm not trying to find 32 votes for Jim, I am the co-zone leader for Zone 8 of the Palm Beach County Democratic Party, which is right here in the city of Delray Beach and the town of Gulf Stream. Wanted to mention just a couple of things before Mark comes on and whatever else might cast in mind. One, reminder, we have an election already underway. It is both the presidential preference primary and the municipal elections for the city of Delray Beach. So if you happen to live in Delray, you will be participating in two elections. One, making your choice for the Democratic candidate for President of the United States, and secondly, to participate in the election of two city commission seats here in Delray Beach, seat 2 and seat 4. We have a bunch of Democrats that are running for these nonpartisan seats. Seat 2, we have Julie Casal, Jennifer Jones, and Deborah Tendrich. And for seat 4, we have the incumbent Shirley Johnson along with Chris Davey and Angela Burns. So pick your favorite Democrat for each of those seats and of course for President of the United States. How many of you have received an absentee ballot in the mail? Okay. So if you've not yet voted, I just want to make you aware of something. So on your absentee ballot, where you see the choices for president, you will see the names of several individuals who have announced suspensions of their campaign. And the reason why they're on the ballot are twofold. One, because at the time of the ballot's printing, many of them were still, active candidates. And secondly, because they have suspended, which is different from withdrawing. So they are still officially candidates, but they are not actively campaigning. So you're advised to pick the candidate of your choice, and by all means fill the bubble in. But please do not strike through or strike out, put lines through any of the candidates that aren't still running. Those extraneous marks can cause your ballot to become invalidated. So just make your way through that long list of candidates and fill in for the candidate of your choice. That's the main thing I wanted to say. Oh, one last thing, pitch. 1 week from Saturday, which would be the 22nd, just as we did last month, Zone 8 will have a day of action here in town. We will be canvassing in the southwest, or actually just below the southwest area of Delray Set Community in Precinct 7214. We will have details on staging of that, but basically next Saturday we will have two shifts going. We will have a shift of canvassing going on from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then a shift from 1 to 4. If any of you are available to help us out on Saturday, come talk to me after the meeting. Okay? All right, that's it. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. And I'm going to bring Brigham Johnson up. He's the precinct leader in Delray. He wants to talk about a plan he has for a door hanging to let people, to help promote the vote this year. We have outside, if you've seen it, the flyer on returning citizens, people who are eligible to vote as a result of Amendment 4 having passed, but may have fines or fees that they haven't paid and that are an impediment. A brief story, we were canvassing the other day and some guy came up and wanted to register to vote, and he filled out the form, but he was afraid to check the box that says, I have not been convicted of a felony, or if I have, I am able to vote now. And he told us that he didn't have any fines on his sentence. So we took the ballot. I called up the number on this sheet. I got a senior investigator there. He said to email me the information. I did it about 10 o'clock in the evening. The next morning at about 9, I had a picture of the guy, his arrest record, what he was arrested for, how much his fines were, and that he had paid his fines. So that's one person that is, it's this sheet. One more person to help get rid of our sociopath in chief. So, okay, great.
You can use that one too.
My name is Brigham Johnson. Like you all, I've been just especially shocked since November 7th, 2016. We have work to do, a lot of work to do, and work to do here in Florida. I've talked about an idea with Bob. He said it could be interesting, work on it. So this is a work in progress. But very powerfully, there's a lot of Republicans moving to this state. That's kind of what gave Trump an edge last time. There's a lot of Republican movement here. Yes, we did just pass the Voting Restoration Amendment. Many of us were active working for this. Dr. Schneider is going to talk about it. He'll fill in around some of what I'll say. But if we can do some quick math, the state of Florida's got 21 million people. 17.5 million are older than are 18 or older. 13.5 million registered to vote. So that's about 3.5 million people who are not registered to vote. This amendment has enabled, the statistics are roughly 600,000 people are in the boat that Michael described. They have records, they have no fines or fees. They can register right now. Another 600,000 cumulatively have about $200 million of debt. So that's about 350 on average. There's a curve, so some are higher than 350, some are lower, but it's not impossible. If if Bloomberg or Steyer thought, well, I have $200 million and I want 600,000 voters, that would be nice. But getting people to really know and engage and be ready to take advantage of these programs takes some time, takes some communication. And besides, there's a lot of people who just could be registered anyway. Desmond Meade, who helped lead the effort, has said, don't put targets on the back of returning citizens. Just go out and register people, and you will find them. Because go back to that math. 600,000 over 3.6 million. That's basically 6 over 36. That's 1 out of 6. 16% are former felons with no fees. Another 16% have fees that are recognizable, but the FORC has a program. They've raised some money. They've restored voting rights to several. But it's not out of the woods for people to get somewhere. So 30% of everybody who's not registered is in this class of returning citizens. So if you're going to talk to anybody who's not registered to vote, 30% chance you're talking to somebody who is newly able, never able to register before, so it's not like they took forever, they could want to vote. So just going out, getting the word out, softening the ground for canvassers to come later and have conversations is behind my idea of, hey, suppose we just make some door hangers and cheap and approachable and have the basic information about voting. You know, how do you register online? How do you call the supervisor of elections and just sign up for vote by mail? Gee, if you had interest in felony conviction questions and what to do, here's a reference. It's like a business card. And getting this stuff out in Palm Beach County, if you look at Democratic-leaning precincts where there was 25% or less turnout in those precincts, that's 85,000 voters who, you know, just a little bit of visit, a simple door hanger that, you know, go. Apartment buildings that let you do that. It's an easy thing to do, and I just feel I can help orchestrate a methodology to help people do this. Each one of these things, and I'll pass them out shortly. You know, 3 on a page, stamp the thing, cut with the scissors, and you've got a door hanger. If you're worried about the wind, you can tape it back up after you hang it. So 2.67 cents per door hanger is not too much. What really is involved is volunteer effort. If we can paint a picture, yes, setting up the information that, okay, I've seen it, and on my own, maybe I went and looked up some information. When a canvasser comes, it's already in mind. Yes, I know what to do. So it's that kind of grassroots thing. Exactly the legals and what to cover, and I don't know, but you have to start somewhere and pull it together. And if you have ideas and interest and want to support, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. I'll just run down this aisle here and send us some of these this way and that way. This is my first batch. I found, oh, it's not dead on to make the right, perfect cuts, but that'll come. You'll get the idea. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brigham. And just so you know, when Amendment 4, when we were collecting petitions, I don't think there's anybody that got more people to sign initially. He sat in shopping centers, he was in people's faces constantly. So I'm going to introduce Mark Schneider right now. I don't know, you're going to talk about Amendment 4. Some of those figures were a little different in terms of what you told me, and it'd be great if you could give your take on it, okay?
Sure. Let me speak briefly about Amendment 4 before I launch into this talk. My understanding, let's just talk about Palm Beach County and what can be done here. You may know that the DA and the supervisor of elections and the public defender and the clerk of court and a couple of other people got together and they have figured out a workaround for fees. Now, not fines, but fees. So if you come across a returning citizen who owes fees. Now, what are fees? When you get involved in the court system, in Florida, we've decided to charge people who get convicted for their conviction. And the privilege of being convicted, right. So they charge you to get a public defender, they charge you for court costs, etc. And many people wind up with at least $1,000 in these are called fees. Now, Judge Hinkle, in his decision that put at least a kind of temporary hold on Senate Bill 7066 for at least the 17 plaintiffs in the case, clearly indicated that fees are a poll tax, and they are unlikely to survive when this goes to trial in April. So right now, in Palm Beach County, if you meet a person, if you run across a person who owes fees, they should call the public defender's office. And the public defender's office has agreed with the chief judge that they're going to separate the fees from the sentence, okay? So Senate Bill 7066 says you must complete all the terms of your sentence, and the fees are going to be taken out of the sentence. So right now, the Voting Rights Coalition is producing little cards in English and Spanish, and we'll have them in English and Creole that tell people what to do. If their conviction was in Palm Beach County, then they go to the public defender. If their conviction was outside Palm Beach County, then they're going to go to the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition to get guidance about how to proceed. But we're making this at least tiny step forward to work around what the legislature did in passing Senate Bill 7066. And it's a good step forward. And then maybe come April, everything will clear up a little bit more when this case is tried. So there's hope in Palm Beach County in particular, and I encourage Brigham to, include on his door hanger some information about that, and I'll be happy to send it to him if he's interested, okay? So let's be hopeful that we can get more people registered than we thought we might otherwise be able to. Yes?
Mark, if somebody checks off on that form, yes, my rights have been restored, and they haven't been, or do they just not get registered, or do they get thrown in jail?
My understanding is that they're not going to get thrown in jail if they did it in good faith. So if they're unaware of the fines and fees that they owe, or the restitution that they owe, and they haven't looked it up, and they go and check that off, the state's attorney is not going to prosecute. Furthermore, we heard today that Tallahassee is essentially letting everybody who checks that in good faith go through. They are not stopping felons simply for their being felons from registering. So my understanding is from the supervisor's office is that they are registering felons now. So I think the form says either I have not committed a felony or my rights have been restored. And that's what we tried to do with Amendment 14. And for many people in Palm Beach County, that's going to be the case. But to be safe, they should call the public defender's office, probably. Okay? So.
Yeah, just want to further answer your question, that I believe it was 2 days ago that Dave Arenberg spoke at the Century Village West Democratic Club and made a public declaration that he will not prosecute.
Right.
Yes.
They can vote.
So that's
Palm Beach County.
there's hope here in Palm Beach County. Other counties, go up to Martin County, another issue, okay? Okay, so I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. It's kind of one of my favorite places to come and talk. I have a talk tonight that I hope will be provocative. It's got a video embedded in it, and I hope I can get the video to work. This is always kind of a iffy thing. I hope the internet is working fine, because the video is kind of fun as well. Just last week in the New Yorker, a historian named Jill Lepore had a little commentary saying that, this isn't the first time that we've been worried about democracy. And she went back and looked at all the writing about democracy in the 1930s and how American citizens had gotten concerned with the status of democracy in our country back in the 1930s. They formed clubs, there were all sorts of civic associations that debated democracy, et cetera, and then we went through a pretty tough period around the world trying to defend democracy. So after I read Jill Lepore's article, I thought, well, it's good to see that this isn't the first time we've struggled with these issues. But on the other hand, the last time we struggled with them, we really had to engage in some fights. So let's hope it's not going to be that bad this time. But what I want to talk about today is democracy in America, whether we are a democracy or not, and then I want to raise the kind of provocative issue of whether we should be, whether democracy is actually suitable to the kind of tremendous problems that we face, particularly with climate change. So, I want to talk about two images we might have of a representative democracy. In the first, we see citizens electing representatives who reflect the citizens' public policy views, right? So we think of the electorate as people who should be scanning the available candidates, trying to match up with the candidate who best reflects their views on what public policy should be. Should we have national health care? Should we have the carbon tax, etc.? And as a matter of fact, there, on the internet, there are little matching devices that will help you do this and will tell you which candidate is best suited to your public policy views. So one image of democracy, a kind of an idealized image of democracy, is that this is the way it works, or at least that it should work. But there's another image of democracy. And in this image, citizens elect representatives who reflect their fears and hatreds, not their public policy preferences, okay? And these legislators consistently misperceive their constituents' policy preferences, and neither the citizens nor the legislators care enough about this discrepancy between the citizens' policy preferences and what the legislators are doing to change. They keep electing them. So, I think it's provocative to ask not which image is, in a sense, the correct one, the true one, because it's clearly, in my estimate, the second.
Yeah.
But, if it is the second, isn't that a democratic choice? Right? So, if you're not willing to take the time to inform yourself about what your representative is doing, and saying, get the bum out of there if he's not reflecting my policy preferences, in a sense, that's your democratic choice. You've chosen to be, shall I say, lazy? You've chosen to tune out. And I don't know which image we ought to be promoting, because if we're promoting the first image, then we've got to get people up off their butts and get their minds engaged and actually do some thinking about politics. If you look at the evening news, the local evening news, it's blood and puppy dogs. So they're not going to find out anything about public policy from the local news. So, American citizens are convinced that their legislators don't reflect their policy views. 76% of them say that their legislators don't care what they think. And that would encourage me to think that they ought to throw them out and find people who do reflect their views. So why? Why don't representatives care about what their constituents believe? And why don't the constituents, the citizens, vote for representatives who do? Well, a first type of analysis of this is what I'm going to call the lobbying analysis. And let's see if I can get this to work.
Lobbying?
Yes, we're going to look at how lobbying works and how this distorts the relationship between legislators and citizens. It's going to take a minute to load. I wish, if I were more skilled, I'd have a way to get this more quickly running.
I will work with you.
Michael?
Yeah, no, what works in the analysis is if you say that the constituents of the representatives are not the people that vote for them, but the people that give them the money, the lobbyists, which I guess is where you're going with
Yep.
this.
But this makes it start. Okay, play. Why didn't it just play?
You wanna-
For the last few years,
Yeah.
I've had this sense that everything I learned as a kid about how American government works is
Yes, I'm going to try to go full screen. My problem is that I have a central tremor. I can't get this to work. Bob, would you put this on the full screen? And let's see if we get the sound to work, too. Okay, now let's get the sound. Yes, it was working. Let's look at that. Let's stop it for a second. And look at the sound.
Michael's loud enough.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what the guy is telling you while we watch this.
I'll keep working.
Okay, he's saying that there's a study by Princeton political scientists that show that in an ideal world, if 0% of the population wanted a policy, there would be zero chance of it getting enacted. If 100% of the populace wanted a policy, there would be 100% chance of it getting enacted. So that's the ideal, okay? But what happens in reality? What happens in reality is that he's saying, you know, if 69% support it, then it has a 69% chance. So what happens in reality? In reality, there is no relationship between what the citizenry wants and what gets enacted in Congress. And he's going to draw a line across the bottom here and show that there's zero relationship between what most people want and what gets enacted in Congress. This is kind of astonishing when you think about it, right? So there's the line. See, there's zero. It doesn't matter if nobody wants it, it gets enacted. If everybody wants it, it doesn't get enacted. So he then goes on to say, that's true for 90% of the population. But if you're a member of the top 10% by wealth in the United States, then the analysis is different. If the top 10% don't want something enacted, it doesn't get enacted. And if the top 10% do want something enacted, it doesn't always get enacted, but it has a much higher chance of getting enacted. So in a sense, we have democracy in the United States only for the top 10% of the population. And then, Bob, I think you can shut it down, and I'll just tell what the rest of the analysis is. He goes on to analyze lobbying and how lobbying works. The lobbyists write the laws, they give them to the legislators, who are promised, once they leave the legislature, well-paying jobs. I mean, they're not paid that much by American standards as legislators, but they can be really well-paid if they get out and start being lobbyists. So if they curry favor with the lobbies, they're apt to be rewarded. And these provisions get slipped into bills in the dead of night, so that sometimes legislators haven't even read them, but they're there. And then we wake up a month later and we find that there's these provisions that nobody can explain. But we know how they got in there. They got in there through lobbyists. So one way of viewing what's going on in the US is to say that democracy has really been corrupted by lobbying. And I would, there'd be a very simple, I think, solution to the problem, which would be to have Congress pass a law that every presentation that a lobbyist makes to a legislature has to be recorded and published. Okay? So that we would know what was going on. Now, is that going to happen? No, but it's a very simple solution. It's kind of like having a Public Records Act. So, one answer to our problem is that there's lobbying. So, furthermore, political scientists have found that legislators consistently misperceive the wishes of their constituents. Republican legislators or conservative legislators believe that their constituents are 20% more conservative than they are in fact. And as a matter of fact, there is no Republican legislator who doesn't believe that his district is not as conservative as the most conservative district in America. So legislators consistently overestimate the conservatism of their constituency. And even Democrats, even liberals, are swayed in the same direction. Not as much, but they believe that their constituents are more conservative than they are in fact.
And the media, too.
Yes. So, from whence do these representatives' misconceptions come? Well, we could argue that people who vie to be representatives self-select to represent the 10%. Okay, so people who get into politics are just more interested in catering to wealthy people than they are to common folk. And in this case, we conclude that politicians actually want to do what the 10% want them to do, and we're not buying votes, we're essentially buying representatives if we're part of the 10%. And then another factor that I think contributes to this is that since World War II, and I think Michael kind of began the evening with a comment about this being the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, there's been no left wing in American politics since World War II. It's been completely eradicated, and now that it's surfacing a little bit again, people are throwing up their hands and saying socialism, 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 right? So, but that's just, that's just good old-fashioned democratic, or it used to be democratic politics. So, the electorate itself, however, is largely unaware of how liberal it is. If we look at many issues, I know this is kind of small for people, but 80% of Americans believe that corporations should pay more taxes. 78% think wealthy people don't pay enough in taxes. 76% believe the wealthiest Americans should pay more. 60% of registered voters believe corporations pay too little, et cetera, et cetera. And then what happens? Okay, this is what citizens believe, and then what do we get? We get the 2017 tax bill. And what does it do? It gives money to wealthy people and to corporations. It gives $1 trillion deficit that we're burdening our children with in order to give money to wealthy people and corporations. And so this analyzes the benefit from the 2017 tax bill to people who, down at this end, who are 0 to 10K, and up at this end, the highest here is 200 to 500K, get the most benefit from it. But what is kind of fascinating about this chart is the gray line is the House, the blue line is the Senate, and the red line is the reconciliation bill. And the reconciliation bill always gives more money away than either the House or the Senate agreed to in the first place. So it's in the reconciliation process that the real theft is going on. And that's why it's important to get named to one of those reconciliation committees, right? Because your future is guaranteed as a lobbyist if you can engage in this kind of thievery. Okay.
I believe at the lower end of the scale that wasn't true. I believe at the lower end of the scale, if I just saw that right,
No, it's always true.
the reconciliation is lower than the
No,
gray.
it isn't.
Which is the
It's
reconciliation?
only here. Only
Okay.
here is the reconciliation lower, and
Yeah,
every
that's
other
the
one
lowest,
gets
yeah.
higher.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, now it's blame time. So who's to blame for this? Well, isn't out to lunch citizenry to blame for this? Well, quite possibly, right? Quite possibly. Because Americans, by and large, are politically out to lunch. You are so unusual for being here tonight, listening to me froth at the mouth over this. Because most people would rather be watching basketball. Okay, so this is about, you know, what do people know about the First Amendment? Well, 37% of Americans know nothing about it.
Really?
Okay, so what is our conclusion? Is the U.S. operating as a democracy? No, it's operating as a plutocracy. Incidentally, I should have prefaced this whole talk by saying, I'm speaking for myself, not for the ACLU. You all understand that, right? Okay? Because the ACLU is completely non-political, in spite of welcoming the removal from office of President Trump. So the U.S. is procedurally a democracy. It can claim to go through the motions of voting, etc., but the real distortion between the wants of the citizens and what gets legislated occurs in hidden rooms in the corridors of power, and the citizens don't care enough, really, to try to change that.
Those citizens who do,
No.
can they?
Pardon?
Those citizens who care enough, is it possible to change?
Well, that's your challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
so should this bother us?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, if people are content to sit back and let this happen, isn't that, in a sense, their democratic choice? You know, I mean, they don't want to be enough bothered with politics. Many people say it's so complicated. It's just too complicated for me to think about. I don't want to have to think about it. I'll tell you a little anecdote. My wife is a tough woman, and she went to I don't know whether it's an X-ray technician. She was having some X-ray done or a sonogram done, and she said to the technician, you know, who you're going to vote for? And she said, well, I'm really not concerned with that because I spend all my time caring for my kid. And so my wife asked again, she said, you know, you really ought to inform yourself and get out and vote. And she said, no, you know, I work and then I spend the rest of my time caring for my kid. And what did my wife say? You are not caring for your kid. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, that kind of brutality is perhaps something that would, on occasion, jog somebody into becoming more conscientious about being a citizen. So, now let's move on to the question, should the U.S. be a democracy? And I'm going to ignore the whole kind of history of the gradual rise in the United States toward a democracy, because at the beginning we weren't, because we didn't allow blacks to vote, right? We didn't allow women to vote, only property males could vote. So there are all sorts of ways in which the United States is only now beginning to kind of approximate a democracy, and even now we have anti-democratic features of our system, which I am a champion of. The Bill of Rights is there to protect us from democratic excess, right? So that our rights can't be taken away from us. So there's a history to this, that we've not been a democracy until only recently, and then we also have provisions that make sure that we don't succumb to democratic enthusiasms. You know, the Electoral College was supposed to help us with that, and the its first real trial, it failed. So today I'd say there are three main drivers of anti-democratic sentiment in the United States. And the first comes out of the legacy of the Civil War, which I think we're gradually beginning to understand is not over yet. Okay? You know, we had the 14th and 15th Amendments in Reconstruction, and then we had Jim Crow erasing those gains, and the Supreme Court supporting it. The Supreme Court was right there behind Jim Crow all the way. So you can't trust the courts to preserve people's rights. And now, with racism and the democratic erosion of white privilege in the United States, we're seeing the kind of the distinctions between people who worry about white privilege being eroded and people who kind of welcome it being eroded as being a really in political play in the United States. And that's clear in the fate of Amendment 4, right? Because we strove for democracy in Amendment 4, and then we had it stripped away from us by the legislature because they didn't want those people voting. So from this perspective, democracy would destroy a particular vision of America. And that's something that we're struggling with on the political battlefield right now. A second threat to democracy is the vast expansion in differential wealth in the United States, with the rich getting richer and the poor really not getting poorer, but not getting much better. And there's a great book by Ganesh Siddharaman called The Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution, which was an eye-opener for me because I never realized that the Founding Fathers were convinced that only a relatively economically equal society could survive as a democracy. And he goes to great lengths to show you that this was built into our Constitution, the presumption that we would be a relatively equal society. And then we got to the Gilded Age and became very unequal. And what with the Depression and then World War II, we went through a period of relative social equality and economic equality in the United States after World War II, with great prosperity in result, with the GDP increasing much faster than it's increasing now. And then along came somebody who didn't like that. And his name was Ronald Reagan.
That's right.
So Reagan combined with Milton Friedman to actually, in a very, Friedman was on TV, this little short man who had very strong convictions about the way the economy should work, free enterprise system, etc. Along came the Koch brothers and other groups like that, setting up think tanks to convey to the world the evils of big government, this notion that the best thing to do with government is to make it so small that you can stick it in a bathtub and strangle it to death, right? So this notion became more and more popular. So the question is, can you get people to vote against this? Can you get people to vote against the increasing absorption of our national wealth by the top 5 or 10% of the population?
No, we can't, because our Constitution doesn't permit it.
All it takes is people willing to inform themselves and say enough is enough with this. But, you'll go out and talk to people and they'll say, I don't want to tax rich people because I might become rich someday and I don't want to be taxed, right?
Mark, Michael Moore's film, Capitalism, A Love Story, he asked that question. He says, why do people think this way? Maybe it's because, and as he's saying that, there is a picture of like a Florida room with the Leave It to Beaver family sitting around the table, enjoying a nice lunch, and there's a little dog on the ground. And the dog is jumping up and down, trying to get something off the table, as Michael Moore is saying, maybe they think someday they'll be rich. They have about as much chance as that little dog of getting something off the table.
Indeed, indeed.
They're Democratic, right?
So, my last point would be that something that we probably didn't anticipate, but that is that there has become an urban-rural divide in America that's very ideologically driven, with the rural areas being heavily evangelical Christian, and developing an image of themselves in which they see me as the equivalent of Satan.
Right.
Okay? But it's not just Satan with like horns. It's a kind of Satan who they see as holding himself so superior to them. A person who speaks in big words, a person who has all these graphs and stuff like that, who probably thinks of himself as a kind of a prince. And they, part of what is driving this is a hatred of me.
Right. Resent.
Me, I represent something that those people don't like at all, and Trump is the opposite of that. Okay? Trump is like them. He shoots his mouth off. He doesn't need any intellectual basis for his opinions. He doesn't need to read. He doesn't need to do anything but speak vituperatively of other people. And see, vituperatively. There you go. Shoot him.
Proof. It's a witch.
Yeah, right, a witch. Yeah.
So I am the enemy. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't another unfair practice in this country that you have states like New York and California and Florida and Texas who have huge populations now, and yet there's only two representatives for each one of these states. So the states in Montana
It's
and
coming.
Idaho and
Next
those areas
slide.
where they're going to
Take over Montana.
Republicans are more represented than the states with the most population who pay the most taxes.
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's where we're going to wind up. Anyway, it is the case that though urban citizens get a little more in terms of tax dollars out of the federal government, rural residents get many more tax dollars that are life-supporting, health care, income maintenance, and stuff like that. So that rural Americans are actually receiving more from the government in terms of life-sustaining benefits than our urban residents. And yet, they're voting against them.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not going to go on to go through all these details. But if you look at the urban-rural divide with Clinton versus Trump, you can see that Clinton wins easily in big cities, and then, unfortunately, quite quickly in large metro suburbs, she just barely beats Trump. In medium metro core, she beats Trump, but just barely, and then medium metro suburbs, small metro, non-adjacent, metro, non-metro adjacent, and non-metro non-adjacent, Trump just crushes Clinton. Even though, we've got to remember, Clinton won the popular vote, right? Okay.
But you want to
So,
the states.
you can really see
Oh,
this
because of
urban-rural
illegal
divide
aliens.
here.
Oh,
Oh.
only because of illegal aliens there.
So, what does the future look like? Now, I'm not a prophet or anything like that, but there's one way of saying that democracy may not suit the next century. It may be that authoritarian leaders who have control over vast resources, like the Communist Party chairman in China, will be much better able to deal with the dislocations that are going to occur as a result of climate catastrophes. And democratic societies will dither and wither in the face of these tremendous dislocations because they just can't get their act together. And democracy is messy, and it's hard for democratic societies to get their act together. So the more we are severely threatened by climate change, and I believe we will be, I'm going to be in the grave, or my ashes are going to be somewhere, but grandchildren, great-grandchildren are going to face this, and face it in the most dramatic and poignant ways, it seems to me. If democracies are going to be effectively respond to these kind of challenges, then we've got to get together and break through people's complacency and waken them up. Now, I don't like the term woke or anything like that, but really, people do need to wake up to the challenges that they face. So, this is a critical time for democracy. Joe Lepore is kind of laughing at my saying that because it was said back in the 1930s, but it was a critical time then, and we're lucky that we survived. So to conclude, here is the United States as it would look if senatorial representation were equal by population, okay? And it's kind of fascinating to look at this map. It's fun.
Yeah, it's great.
We've got the state of Miami. We've got the state of Florida Rica, which combines Central Florida with Puerto Rico. Isn't that kind of cute? We've got Central Florida, then we got Georgia, Florida. We've got Dallas, Fort Worth as a state. Houston as a state. Apple is Manhattan and the other boroughs. Long Island Sound is a state along with part of Connecticut, and then Boston Providence is a state, and then out here you have Great Plains, Great Basin, etc. Pacifica includes Hawaii and Alaska, West Cascades, and then East Cascadia, which includes Montana. And if we wanted to change our system to make it more democratic, I think it's just kind of fun to look at this map. Okay? So, that's my rant.
Doesn't it require a constitutional amendment where you need a majority of governors from each state to have a continental Congress? And then change, the same with the Electoral College, and we can never get that in our government right now.
You know,
either one cannot change.
The best thing to think about is the national popular vote initiative, right?
That's the only thing.
Because it's not that far from being enacted. Enacted means once we get enough states to get 270 electoral votes, that then the presidency will go to the person who wins the popular vote. Let's keep our fingers crossed that that person is the right person, huh? Because I'm chagrined to have to say that the 2016 election, I think, had to shake our confidence a little bit in the sagacity of our fellow citizens. And when we see the adulation, the cult-like adulation that Trump is receiving, it's just pretty astonishing and disturbing. I mean, it's enough to drive you to drink. Okay, so thank you so much for listening to me. Questions?
My hope is with the millennials, okay? I mean, I think that's not a profound statement. We know that the white privileged 65 and older are going to be, I mean, we're unfortunately in the minority among them, you know, and good riddance when they go. But the problem is, I just spent last week debating with some young kid who thought, you know, he knew it all, just like we thought we knew it all, like I thought I knew it all when I voted for Barry Commoner in 1980, because, you know, what's the difference between Carter and Reagan? Well, I woke up pretty fast after that. But you have so many young people who are saying, you know, there's no difference. That's how Trump won. was by, well, that's one of the ways he won, was by convincing people that, you know, the Democrats are just, they're all politicians, you know? I mean, just like the guy that steals a loaf of bread to feed his family is a thief, and the serial killer is a thief, you know, and they can't tell the difference between them because, as you said, they're lazy. But that seems to me to be our task, is convincing that group that they really need to vote. And it seems in the midterms, they shot up. There was the biggest increase between, you know, of any cohort. And I think just as I learned in 1980, a lot of people learned, a lot of young people in 2016, is you don't sit it out. You don't vote for Jill Stein. You know, you vote for the lesser, call them the lesser of two evils. It's still less evil. That's my way.
I agree with you completely, and I just, one gets extremely tired of Democrats acting like Republicans.
That's right.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's very depressing. Bob?
Yeah, Mark, conspicuously missing from your three anti-democratic forces is what I think is a fourth, but I would love your take on it, which is Citizens United.
Oh, yeah.
He's in favor of it.
Okay. Yes. As a matter of fact, I honestly think Citizens United its effect is way overblown. I think that in a sense, I think of political campaigns as kind of a potlatch. That's where people used to throw their possessions on a fire to show how much they could burn in order to impress their friends. Because it just turns out that the people who spend the most don't always win. And that people who can raise money, Bernie Sanders is raising quite a bit of money in small amounts from people. It's a lot of money. But the big PACs, personally, I don't think have been that effective. And in a sense, I'm pleased to see so much money burnt with so little effect. So Bob, I just don't buy the effect. So why don't you give a counter argument briefly?
It's always a smart thing to take on, Mark. Not. But I guess, when I look, for example, at the, recent, not so recent, but decades-long history of achieving gun safety in America, and the effect of the gun lobby and other PACs in working against it, and how they control the agenda both at the federal and at the state level, that force has been further emboldened by the 2010 decision. As just one example of where I think Citizens United has wielded a good glove.
Well, my little counter argument to that would be that we could learn a lot from the NRA because they have very effectively organized. And even though the NRA has been captured by a manufacturer's lobby as opposed to a gun owner's lobby, nevertheless, they, up until very recently, had such an effective mobilization mechanism, which involves, getting families out with their little kids out shooting and gun instruction and so on and so forth, and making a so-called family thing. And if we had an organization that could similarly get families drawn together in endeavors that they enjoy together and consistently do that and make them feel knit into a family, maybe we'd be doing better. Then.
Well, I used to be an optimist. I'm losing hope. And I think the most difficult thing to do is to change. People do not take to change very readily. And I continue to think of a song that is my absolute favorite song from South Pacific. You've got to be taught. And the NRA and the families that take their children out and they play, there's this family group are teaching their children. And we need to teach young people before they form their ideas. And we are not doing a good job.
I would agree.
Susan? Part of that teaching thing, I mean, the young people now are on their phone every minute. They are not doing
But you
hands-on
need to
type
change them,
things.
and you're not going.
And that is part of, I mean, if you have a grandchild,
Oh, anybody.
and you know that those kids are, they're doing this and they're not out playing and everything. So that is part of what has to change. That is part of what All People's Day is trying to do. You know, we have hands-on things. This is, and this is, you know, in every time, the older people, like most of us here, are looking, saying, you know, the new thing is not good. But when the new thing takes on every part of the person, it is destroying the personhood. And it's going to change. I mean, you said you used to be an optimist. I am an optimist. It can't go on like that unless everything goes, which of course could happen because of the environment and everything. But it has to go the other way, because you go and you go and you go, and then before you know it,
And he has
it goes
three
another way. So
branches
it
of
will.
our government,
It will.
himself, the Supreme Court, and the Senate. He has those three things completely in his court.
Yep.
And it's by design, and how can you defeat that? How can you defeat that?
Well,
Look at John
the
Roberts,
Senate is
sat
a real
and did
problem.
nothing in that impeachment.
Right? Yes, ma'am.
Two things. I don't understand why we use the future, not you, but in general, use the future tense on all of this. It's here. When you have a president who dictates to the Justice Department, to make up military decisions, and I
Imagine if a
don't
Democrat
want-
did that.
What do you think is coming? So what's the next piece? The next piece is hope, and we hope that a majority will do the right thing. But remember, was it John Adams? I can't remember who said beware of the majority because they can be wrong. And that's kind of what we had happen in 2016, as you said so well. They see themselves in him. And therefore, there's nothing for them to rationalize, to think out, to do anything except applause.
Okay, then we can be hopeful that they are older and quicker to die than us.
That's right.
Let me get this gentleman and then we'll come here. I'm probably a rarity. I'm a very educated, very knowledgeable political consultant and activist. I'm a former member of the Massachusetts Democratic State Committee, and I've consulted on nearly 200 political campaigns, many of whom were legislators. Here's something that I have discovered in my career. First of all, most people do not have enough knowledge of the political system or of government workings to be active in politics. Just the same as most of us do not have enough medical knowledge to be physicians. So we hire physicians to do that for us. We hire people to represent us in the legislature and in other branches of government to do those jobs for us because most of us do not have the skills or the knowledge or the capability to do that, and we cannot expect people to do that. Most people are not interested in it. We are. We're here because we are. But most of the people out there are not. And we can't expect them to do it. Now, the United States, not to contradict you, but the fact is the United States is not and never has been a democracy. We are, by definition, a republic. We elect our representatives not just to represent our views, but to represent us in researching and finding out more about issues that we can't do. And they make the decisions on our behalf. That's what we elect them for, and that's what we pay them for. And we should not expect them to take polls every time they want to make a decision. That's not their job. Their job is to represent us in Congress. Not just to vote,
But they
but to...
started She Eagle
Well, no, I'm not debating that.
Vote.
I'm not talking about that. We have to replace a good number of these people because they are not doing the job we elected them to do. But we have to remember what we do elect them to do. What we elect them to do is to represent us. We citizens elected representatives. In Massachusetts, where I come from, the legislature is composed largely of citizens of the town. It's called town meeting. That is a democracy. That is a pure democracy. We are not a democracy. We're a republic. We are way too big to hold a national town meeting. Thank you. I have two women here and then the gentleman in the back.
I just want to talk and say, I'm optimistic because for many of us, we have civics in our school. For a while now, civics has not been taught in school, or it's been really scaled down to a very minimal class or an elective. The League of Women Voters has gone into schools and have really pushed to have civics back in the classroom. They've gone in, they volunteer, they have the civics bowl, they have all kinds of things to get kids back into understanding what exactly government is. So I think that's optimistic. I think we should support things like that. So whenever you see something about civics classes and League of Women Voters, please support that.
Thank you.
And my comment is just look how hard the kids from Stoneman Douglas worked against gun legalization. And what happened? Nothing. Nothing. What does that tell these kids?
You live in Florida. It's a Republican state.
I mean, it's sad.
Owned completely by the Republicans.
Well, my husband writes letters and letters and letters to me. Believe me, nothing happens.
Live in a Republican
A
state.
very little bit happened, and it was kind of ridiculous.
There's a real basic economic crisis change coming. Millions and millions of jobs are going to be disappearing in the future. Yet we'll be creating more and more wealth with fewer and fewer people. So we've really got to work on our economic system to redistribute that wealth. I think Andrew Yang's idea of a universal basic income is going to become more and more important. And we got to do it without creating the debt, because debt is bullshit. We can create money without debt, distribute it to people. If you've ever listened to the stock market station, you'll hear the people say, it's the consumer-driven society now. Consumers are driving, buying, and keeping the economy afloat. We need consumers to be to get a UBI so they
Raise the
can...
minimum wage and baloney, but if you raise the minimum wage, the owners of the businesses will raise their prices. That's a load of crap. That's a false sense that if you give the money to the consumer like a projected, then they spend money and it increases and improves.
We need consumers
But
to
you're
buy in
an argument in this state about not raising the minimum wage. They won't do it here in Florida.
The citizens may do it.
We could do it, but the government here isn't.
Well, vote them out.
I tried.
We redistribute the wealth. Okay, and UBI is a good way to do that.
Great. Other comments?
Yeah. Following up, I think it was Steve that said it about citizens not being engaged. One reason they're not engaged goes back to Ronald Reagan and the disappearance of, well, the union busting that he engaged in. People used to go down to the union hall and talk politics. You know, there's no union hall. I mean, there's what, 8% of private workers belong to unions. Instead, as Mark said, they're, you know, watching basketball, if they're even awake, you know, because they're working two jobs, and they come back, and then if they happen to watch the local news, what they get is a bunch of disinformation by Sinclair Sinclair Broadcasting, which owns most of the local news stations, and then even the national news. I mean, these you had, and I was very nice to see Les Moonves given the boot at CBS, but you remember he bragged that Trump is terrible for America, but it's great for CBS. The money's rolling in. You know, I mean, these. What we need to do is reform the media, because the media was one, I think maybe the second or third reason that Trump won. You know, James Comey is up at the top. I think they're second. Hillary's data management team, who gave us the app in Iowa, is third. We need gatherings like this, you know, speakers like Mark coming in and just engaging young people. I mean, that's really the key, because they're disillusioned. You know, they see that it's stacked against them. You know, and what's the point? You talk about being optimistic or losing your optimism. They don't have it to start.
And that's why they're not here.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. There's the young Democrats here, and from what I know, they go to bars and sit around, you know, and have a good time. We had the young Democrats here on a panel, and it actually. I mean, in fact, Steve, you spoke to the guy afterwards, the president of the club. They're saying, you know, at the local level, we don't see that much difference between Democrats and Republicans. You know, we go out to the beach. There was an article in the Palm Beach Post. We go out to the beach and we clean up the beach together. Yeah, but, you know, I mean, they have an R after their name, you know, and when they get older, you know, maybe they'll end up in Congress, and their party doesn't believe in climate change. So, anyway, I'm gonna let Bob make a pitch for, or I'll do it. Our next meeting is on the census. It's the second Thursday in March. We're going to have a speaker from the League of Women Voters and a speaker from the city of Delray Beach, talking about the importance of the census, because we can get extra representatives in Florida, and if those representatives are in Southeast Florida, that's going to be 2 more Democrats in Congress. So.
Susan might want to say a word about all people?
Yes.
Give her a mic. Let's just get the mic to you, Susan.
Okay, we've been hearing a lot of sad things. We know that there are a lot of sad things going on in this world. I'm going to tell you about something that's not sad, something that is happy and connected, and that's All People's Day. That's ALL. I'm spelling it because people think I'm saying old people, like us, but no, it's all people. And right here in Pompey Park on March 21st, which is a Saturday, we have our 11th annual All People's Day Diversity Festival. And we have 15 performers from different cultures, 50 booths, many nonprofits doing interactive activities. All People's Day, and free food from many different restaurants, from different cultures. The idea of All People's Day is to connect people from many different cultures and many different situations through the arts. Because, you know, the arts touch people's hearts. And that's what we need. We need people to have their hearts come out and vote. So we will be, you know, signing people up to vote, etc. Many different things. If you want a little piece of paper about it to remind you, come to me, I'm sitting right here, come to Old People's Day, and feel.
Old People's Day.
And our club will have a table there, so we, as we have for the last 4 years.
Thanks, Susan. It was great. We've been there the last few years. Brigham's going to say something, but first, I think, let's thank Mark again. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you all, it's always great to be here. Thank you very much for your time.
Greg.
We're wrapping up. This is brief. These little guys that I described earlier, they're like seeds. I like to see tens of thousands, 100,000. It is doable. These things, there's a Google document. People can take it and put their own name and contact information and fool around with it. I can talk some more. These are seeds or they're bullets. But this is little by little by little something we can do. I also we talked about civics. We talked about engaging young people. I would bet that probably 80% plus do not know what to do with this QR code that's on either side. In fact, I couldn't have told you a week or two ago, and I know they're everywhere. But it's very important because this is actually a way to view a really powerful rap video that is a civics lesson. And it's so simple, it's crazy. If you take your phone and you take a picture, well, if you kind of aim this with your phone camera, your phone itself is going to be smart enough to recognize the QR code and turn it into the URL that goes to the site of this video. I highly encourage you, check out the video. This is the kind of connection if people want to, the targets if they look. It is connecting. So I'll just leave it at that. Again, my contact information is at the bottom of this email address. Michael, thank you.
I don't know. How about Jim?
Yes. Jim?
Hey guys, give us another couple of minutes.
Hi everybody, Jim Bonfiglio. Most of you know me, candidate for State House District 89. Let me just comment on a couple of things that were discussed tonight. Getting people to come out to vote and some of the lower turnout rates. I view my job as a candidate, my responsibility to give you reasons to come out to vote. If you don't come out to vote, it's because something I didn't do. I didn't give you a good enough reason to come out and vote for me. That's something that I have to work on, or other candidates have to work on. You can't really blame the voters for not wanting to come out if you don't give them a reason to come out and vote for you. That goes up and down, the slate of candidates. Number two, on the economy, we talked a little bit about jobs and this economy. This economy isn't as great as everybody says it is. I know you read the paper, great economy, great economy. Trump has created 1.5 million less jobs in the 3 years he's been in office than in the last 3 years of Obama's in the job. And relate that to what's going on with the deficit and debt. If you remember back, one of the reasons we came out of the Great Depression in 2007 is because Congress passed an $800 billion bill to put more money into the economy. A lot of that was directed as direct spending, directly into the pockets, I believe the basic income is one of the best ways to get money into the economy. It's a direct payment to people. There was $800 billion tax bill, I think it was over 2 or 3 years, and most of it was directed towards getting money directly into the economy. What's going on now is that we're on, because of the tax cuts, 3 years of $1 trillion deficit spending. So that's classic Keynesian economics. Their deficit spending is their way of jump-starting the economy. And that's why we've kept the GDP going at about 2%, 2.1%. And when you look at the unemployment numbers, people try to tell you unemployment is great, everybody's working. That's not true either, because there's 6 different levels of employment. we use U3, which is the middle level of employment, which essentially measures everybody who's working compared to everybody who's looking for a job and has not jumped out of job eligible age. That's U3. U6 is everybody who's working compared to everybody who wants a job, who's underemployed, who's looking for work, and who has also dropped out of the workforce. U3 is about half of what U6 is. So there's all that number, that many people, it's about 6-7%. 65%, that's a different measure. 65%, I think, is what you're talking about, is the employment rate. That's probably a better measure of employment. That took a big drop when we hit the recession, and it dropped down, I believe, into the 55% level. And it worked its way slowly up to 62, 63, and it's hovering around 64, 65% for the past few years under the Trump administration. That's the better measure of employment, and people are just not. Do you wonder why? You know, they announce unemployment every month, and the number of people employed goes up 100,000, 150,000, but the unemployment rate goes up. How can we get that many jobs created and the unemployment rate goes up? That's because they're drawing people that were not looking for work from the U6 level and are coming back in to look for jobs. So use these points to talk to people when the right wing and the Trumpistas try to tell you what a great economy we have. It's not true. That's why we have about 60% of the people in the United States who, if they faced a financial crisis where they would have to pay something more than $400 immediately, they wouldn't be able to do it. So we have a terrible economy. Don't believe the numbers are telling you, because the numbers are made up to make it look good.
I just interject that there will be a crash. There will be a recession coming. And if it comes before the election, that's good. If it comes after the election, that's really bad, because imagine if Trump was in the White House in 2008.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure we're going to get to the recession because, as I said, we're doing deficit spending. It's 3 times the $800 million, more than 3 times the $800 million that brought us out of the recession. So that's what's propping up our economy. It's just very inefficient measure of getting money to people's hands because it went primarily to corporate interest. And they really, you know, you give a rich man $50,000, he's going to put it in the bank. You give a poor person $50,000 and they're going to buy a car, they're going to buy groceries, they're going to, you know, they're going to go to the gas station, they're going to, you know, educate their kids, they're going to spend it. And that's when you hear about, you know, direct money to people, the direct payment method is the best way to get money circulating in the economy. Because people like us, we get the money, we spend it. Rich people get the money and they don't. And the corporations, what most of them did was buy back the corporate stocks, which increased the value of the stocks, which increased the value of management, shares of stocks, things like that. So when people try to convince you that the economy is humming along great, use these statistics and tell them you're a little bit wrong and here's why. You know, there's $3 trillion of deficit spending that's keeping this economy afloat. And the problem they're going to have is when it finally runs out of steam, the Fed doesn't have the ability to reduce interest rates much lower.
Exactly.
So we're really going to hit a big wall when the deficit spending doesn't work anymore, as more of these people come out and try looking for jobs, and there's no money. That's the key to the economy. There's 3 actors in the economy. There are corporations. That's actor number 1. Number 2 is consumers, and actor number 3 is the government. And recessions hit when the consumers stop spending and businesses stop spending, and that's why the government comes in and spends. That's what takes us out of recession. They won't be able to do it because they're not going to have the money, and they're not going to have the ability to reduce interest rates to encourage more spending. So again, Jim Bonfiglio, State House District 89. We have, if you want to do, to help me get elected, you know, you can. One of my constituents is Donald Trump, And we can, he lives in Mar-a-Lago, it's in the district. We can send him a message in November by voting a Democrat to represent him in the State House. And give a veto to the impeachment acquittal that he got and say, no, we're vetoing that. We're going to send a Democrat to represent you. These are postcards. We have instructions on sending out postcards. It's going to NPAs. I don't know, there's what, 15 or 20 in here? It'll take you maybe an hour to sit down and addresses and stamps and even a pen. So if you want to help me send out a postcard, sit down for an hour or so. I got little packages.
Come up and get them.
Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you. All right, pull out of here.
So I don't want to leave holding these, so I want.
You don't want to be holding the bag?
One left. Who wants the last packet of postcards? Come on, it's a highlight. I see a hand up there. Okay, come on up and get them. All right. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Okay. Postcards for Jim. Not that we don't like having Jim around here, but for at least 2 months a year, we have got to send this man to Tallahassee. Okay? And that brings us full circle right back to the election that has begun right now. Why do we want to work, talk to our neighbors, talk to our friends, get everybody to vote in this presidential primary and in this municipal election? Why do we want to do that? Why? Because anybody who votes in this election, you can be darn sure they're going to vote on November 3rd for Jim Bonfiglio, okay? And for the Democratic candidate for president. So let's activate our voters. Let's get people who live in the city to vote for Angela Burns, for Jennifer Jones, one of the other Democrats who are running, but mostly let's get people to vote. Right here, right now, okay? And if anybody wants to come out next week for our day of action, just come and see me.
And there are macaroons in the back.
Caruso, what do you say? How many